The tipping point. The tipping point. How little things can make a big difference. Malcolm Gladwell. Every time someone in Baltimore comes to a public clinic for treatment of syphilis or gonorrhea, John gentleman plug his or her address into his computer so that the case shows up as a little black star on a map of the city. It's rather like a medical version of the maps police department put up on their walls with pins marking where crime have occurred. On Gentleman's map on the neighborhood of East and West Baltimore, on either side of the downtown core tend to be thick with black stars. From those two spots, the case radiates outward along the two central roadways that happen to cut through both neighborhoods. In the summer, when the incidence of sexually transmitted disease is highest, the clusters of black stars on the road leading out of East and West Baltimore become thick with cases. The disease is on the move, but in the winter months, the map changes and the weather turns cold, and the people of the East and West Baltimore are much more likely to stay at home, away from the bars and clubs and street corners where sexual transactions are made. The stars in each neighborhood fade away. The seasonal effect on the number of the cases is so strong that it's not hard to imagine that a long, hard winter in Baltimore could be enough to slow or lessen substantially, at least for the season, the growth of the syphilis epidemic. Epidemics, Gentleman's maps demonstrate, are strongly influenced by their situation, by the circumstance and conditions and particulars of the environment in which they operate. This much is obvious. What is interesting, though, is how far this principle can be extended. It isn't just prosaic factors like the weather that influence behavior. Even the smallest and subtlest and most unexpected factors can affect the way we act. One of the most infamous incidents in New York City history, for example, was the 1964 starving death of a young Queens woman by the name of Kitty Genovese. Genovese was chased by her assailant and attacked 3 times on the street. Over the course of half an hour, as 38 of her neighbors watched from their windows. During that time, however, none of the 38 detainees called the police. The case provoked a round of self-recriminations. It became symbolic of the cold and dehumanizing defect of urban life. Abu Rosenthal, who would later become editor of the New York Times, wrote in a book about the case. Nobody can say why the 38 did not lift the phone while Miss Genovese was being attacked, since they cannot say themselves. It can be assumed, however, that their farce was indeed one of the big city variety. It's almost a matter of psychological survival. If one is surrounded and pressed by millions of people to prevent them from constantly infringing on you, and the only way to do this is to ignore them as often as possible, Indifference to one's neighbor and his trouble is a condition that reflects in life in New York as it's in other big cities. This is the kind of environmental explanation that makes intuitive sense of us. The anonymity and alienation of big city life makes people hard and unfeeling. The truth about Gen of us, however, turn out to be a little more complicated and more interesting. Two New York City psychologists, Bill Latan of Columbus University and John Darby of New York University, subsequently conducted a series of studies to try to understand what they dubbed the bystander problem. They staged emergence of one kind or another in different situations in order to see who would come and help. What they found surprisingly was that the one factor above all else is predicted helping behavior of how many witnesses there were to the event. In one experiment, for example, Latan and Darby had a student alone in a room staged as epileptic fits. When there was just one person next door listening, that person rushed to the student's aid 85% of the time. But when subject thought that there were four others also overhearing the seizure, they came to the student's aid only 31% of the time. In another experiment, people who saw smoke seeping out from under a doorway would report it 75% of the time when they were in their own, but the incident would be reported only 38% of the time when they were in a group. When people are in a group, in other words, responsibility for acting is diffused. They assume that someone else will make the call, or they assume that because no one else is acting, the apparent problem, the seizure-like sound from the other room, the smoke from the door, isn't really a problem. In other cases of the kitty Genobus, then social psychologists like Rattan and Daly argue the lesson is not that no one called despite the fact that 38 people heard the simple. It's that no one called because 38 people heard a scream. Ironically, had she been attacked on a lonely street with just one witness, she might have lived. The key to leaving people to change their behavior, in other words, to care about their neighbor in distress, sometimes lies in the smallest detail of their immediate situation. The power of context states that human beings are a lot of times sensitive to their environment than they may seem. The three rules of the tipping point, the laws of the few, the stickiness factor, the power of context, offer a way of making sense of epidemics. They provide us with a direction of how to go about reaching the tipping point. The balance of this book will take this idea and apply them to other puzzling situations and epidemics from the world around us. How do these three rules help us understand teenage smoking? For example, what the phenomenon of word of mouth, or crime, or the rise of bestseller? The answer may surprise you.